Welcome back everyone. For today's video we are once again going to be continuing with our educational speedrun series. As such, without further ado, let's jump right into the action with a 10-minute rapid game.
Zooming through the game with a bomb cloud start, trashing all your prep like it's modern art. Knight on the rim, he'll still find the win. Chat's going wild, bro thinks he's Hikaru again. Oh hey, hey, he's smurfing play-by-play, beats you blindfolded, still sipping latte. Queens are flying, eagles meet defeat, just another speed run on Hikaru Street.
So we got the move d4. Now after the move d4, I'm going to stick to basics, play knight to f6 once again. Obviously at the range we're at in terms of ratings, I expect a lot of system players here. I expect them to know the first 5 to 6 moves in general. And once again, we got the move bishop f4. Now this of course is the London system, white can place against, whoops, I didn't mean to do that, my mistake. Sorry about that, you guys. Let me refresh my board. Didn't mean to do that. Let's keep going with the action. Now after this move bishop to f4, generally black can play moves like d5 or c5. We have a London system, and this time I'm going to play the move pawn to c5. Now what I was starting to say before I accidentally minimize the board is that normally white will play bishop f4 against either d5 or knight f6. Generally it's considered a little bit better against, I would say, d5 versus knight f6, but now my opponent plays the move knight f3. Now normally here white should play either e3 or c3, so I'm a little bit confused by this move, and I'm going to take the pawn. We might get a quick win in the opening here. There's an opening trap that if my opponent is unaware of, I'm going to actually win the game, which is after knight takes pawn, I play the move e5, and now I fork the bishop and the knight. And now after queen to a5 check, suddenly out of nowhere we get a classic 90-degree right triangle, and I'm going to win the bishop. Now this theme of moving the queen out to check the king and win a piece is very common actually in some Sicilian variations, so I'll probably give a couple of highlights after the game ends, but in this case, no matter how my opponent blockades here, I'm going to take the bishop and I'm going to win the game. Let's pre-move it. So we get the move pawn to c3. I take the bishop. Let's move the queen back. Now the goal basically finish the development, move the bishop, get the king out of the center here. Now I'm simply up a bishop for one lone pawn. So I want to finish my development. I'm going to castle the king, look to activate these pieces next. With these pawns on e3 and c3, white can't easily create any threats in the center of the board, so I should have more than enough time. I'll play d5 here. D6 also fine, but basically I want to open up the diagonal for this bishop. Let's go knight c6. My opponent goes knight to b5, attacking this queen here. Many squares for the queen. I can go to b6, b8, d8. Doesn't really matter which square I go to. In this case, I'm going to go to b6, and the reason I'm going to go to b6 is primarily I still want to move my bishop out and then be free to bring the rook to the center. If I go to d8 or b8, it's fine, but it does prevent this rook from getting into the game very quickly. So by going to b6 here, I can simply move the bishop, bring the rook in the center. But of course, for anyone who's wondering, any square is really fine. I just want to keep the development a lot simpler here to bring this rook into the game. So we get the move queen to c2. Now here I can move the bishop, but actually what I'm going to play is this move a6. I want to kick this knight away very quickly, and also you'll notice that no matter where the knight goes, if the knight goes to d4, I'm free to trade the knights off, because again, remember I have 3 minor pieces to white's 2, so all these even exchanges I'm very happy with. We got pawn takes. And now I'm going to play the move bishop g4, trying to force another trade of even more pieces off the board. Again, with this extra bishop on the board, the extra piece, I'm very happy with the even trades. We get bishop d3, and now I could play the move queen to e6, stopping white from finishing the development, but I'm just going to follow the themes and play bishop h5 here with the idea of bishop g6 forcing this bishop off the board, and leading to less pieces therein. So my opponent goes knight to f1. I'm going to play bishop to g6 here, forcing a trade of the bishops. If white moves the bishop, you lose the queen, so white's going to probably trade. Now the funny thing about this position is this is going to be a situation where if my opponent trades the bishops, I'm actually going to, I think, violate one of the rules that I've explained to you guys before, but instead we get knight g3, so I don't have to. Let's just trade the bishops. I could take the pawn here, but I'm just going to go g6, stopping this knight maneuver to f5 to hit this bishop. But also I create look for the king, so there's no ice skater checkmates on the back ranks. It's multi-purpose, create the square, but also stop knight f5. We got b3, and now I'm going to go bishop d6, simply spying the knight. Probably I'm going to trade the bishop for the knight on the next move or two. We'll see if my opponent moves the knight away. I actually expect my opponent to move the knight, but let's see if that's what happens as a matter of fact. we get knight f5. Okay, I just take the knight. Now my opponent does have a threat of queen g5 while hitting the knight here, so I think what I'm going to play here is I'm going to play the move rook to e8, checking the white king. My opponent's going to move the king somewhere here, and I'm going to come with a very elegant defensive situation, which is, it's important to note here, which is I'm going to move the bishop back. My queen guards the knight, but more importantly, I'm going to put this bishop on g7 to shield this king. We end up with a fianchettoed bishop here on g7, but with the pawns, the bishop, and the knight, my king is completely safe here with all these pieces. And of course, because my opponent has sacrificed a knight on top of it, now I have 2 extra minor pieces here. As long as there's no big attack on my king, I'm just going to win the game because I simply have too much material. So we'll go bishop g7, guard the knight. Rook is guarded by the rook and the knight. I'll pre-move rook takes rook here. Get h4. Okay, so just following the themes, trade the rooks. Try to trade even more heavy material off the board. Now my opponent's down to 2 pieces really to try and checkmate me. White has a bunch of pawns, with only 2 pieces left on the board here. I'll take, probably queen c8 will be played. That's what I expect. Now we get h5. Okay, I'm gonna go queen e6, offer the trade of the queens here. Again, with these 2 extra minor pieces here, the rest is really simplistic. We get queen f3, I'll probably check. Okay, let's go here, force the queens off the board on the diagonal. Very simple. Just reduce the material, make it simple to where my opponent only has pawns on the board. I'll just trade the queens. Let's go h6, force another trade. Get g6. Okay, now I'm gonna go knight f6, attacking the pawn. As long as white can't really create passed pawns on the queen side, everything is simple here. So this game's gonna end very soon. I'll pre-move king takes pawn on f7. Okay, we get the trade. I'm just simply going to take the pawn on h5 or g4 first, come back, take this one like this. All this is really simple. Let's just go king g6 here. I could play knight f6, but I don't want this king to get too close to the center of the board, so I'll just go here, guard the knight, and stop the king from coming in. Let's go b5, stop white from pushing this pawn here. King h4. Okay, let's just go bishop f8, attack the pawn. Basically make sure that my opponent has to clog the queen side, and now with the queen side completely frozen, neither of these pawn pushes being possible, now I'm just free to start focusing 100% on the king side, just advancing the king and the pawn. Now this is an important thing also to remember if you're newer to the game, which is sometimes if one side of the board becomes completely frozen, you can just focus here, and I'm actually just playing this like a king and pawn versus king situation because white can never push these pawns. So if one side of the board becomes frozen like this, you can just start focusing solely on playing a king and pawn endgame on the queen side, or the king side I should say. I'm gonna take with the d pawn because my knight can blockade this pawn. Take. Okay, I'm just gonna take again. I'll take this one. Okay, this let's go here. Just gonna cut this king off, force the king into this corner. Let's go h3, and now I'll just push the pawn down. Important not to allow stalemate. Go check, and then checkmate next turn. So that game was relatively straightforward. Let's get back to the start. All right, so in terms of analysis, what I was mentioning at the start of the game is that London system very playable against both knight to f6 or the move d5 here. Generally, I think it's considered a little bit better against knight f6 because when black plays d5 on move 1, you go bishop f4 on move 2, there are options like c5 with a very early queen b6 to hit the center and this queen side immediately. So it's completely fine to play it against d5, but I would say in general, if your opponent goes knight f6, this is considered even better. Now when we got bishop f4 here, I played the move c5, and now we got this move knight to f3, which is actually a serious mistake here, as you can tell from the valuation bar. Probably here what white should play if it were grandmaster is this move d5 followed by knight to c3 and e4, and then we get this classic Benoni structure with the pawns in the center of the board, so like say g6 e4, and this is known as the Benoni pawn structure here. Very commonplace, but if I'm playing against someone who's a little bit newer to the game, more of a beginner, I would expect them to play either e3 or the move c3, trying to reinforce the center. This is one of the reasons that I do really think the London system makes sense as a beginner, because you get this very easy development from the get-go. Now, had my opponent play the move e3, my intention was to play queen to b6 here, attacking the pawn on b2. White should generally go knight c3 here. If black were to take after knight to b5, this becomes very sharp after knight to d5. This is a very theoretical variation, I will point out. This is played in top level games, but of course the purpose of this video is not to get into big theoretical discussion about long variations. So I'm just pointing out how the game would continue generally. And that's also why normally if it's a stronger player, they will play d5, but at the beginner levels, let's say you get e3, queen b6 here, say your opponent plays b3, logical move as well to avoid hanging a pawn. Now black can go g6 and bishop g7, and after knight f3, bishop g7, let's say c3 and d6 here. As you can tell from the evaluation bar, black's a little bit better because after the logical developing moves, sorry, not bishop e2, h3 here to stop the knight h5 idea, let's say castles, bishop e2, knight c6 and castles. Now after bishop to f5, black can bring the rooks to the center of the board very quickly. You can also play for an idea like e5 down the road, so say white goes bishop g3, rook d8, rook e1. You can play something like e5, hoping to open up this d file if white were to trade any pawns. Or you can also play something like rook c8 here, and if white goes knight to 2, now you can trade and play this move knight to b4, and very quickly with the knight, the bishop, and the rook, black is attacking on this open c file. So we got knight to f3. I took here. White has to play the move queen takes pawn. After knight c6 and queen d2, white is still in the game, but after moves like d5 followed by like a knight to e4 here, black should be better. In fact, computer says knight e4 here and black's much better, so maybe white should go queen to d3. But at any rate, white is not getting the center that you want when you play the London system without this pawn on d4 here. So without the pawn, this is already bad. So in the game, we got the move knight takes pawn, which blunders to e5 because I have this classic 90-degree right triangle, checking the king and winning the bishop here on e5. This is something that's a little bit rare in these d4 openings. It's much more common in the Sicilian. So for example, you can get a variation like e4, c5, knight f3, e6, d4, takes, knight f6. And a good question here is why can't white play e5, harassing the knight, forcing the knight to move, and then playing something like c4. Now, as you can tell from the valuation bar, white is much better here. But the reason that white cannot play this move e5 is the same thing. Your queen to a5, checking the king, hitting the pawn, and after knight c3 and queen takes pawn, black is simply up a pawn from the get-go. So there are many variations in the Sicilian where this theme of e5 and queen to a5 exists. It's pretty rare in these d4 systems, but nonetheless, this is an exception where I'm able to play this move e5. Actually, one example which I forgot to mention in the Sicilian is that sometimes your opponent will make a mouse slip and play knight to f3 here. They'll play the wrong order, and here black can go e5 guarding the pawn. This isn't necessarily considered great for black, but you can temporarily guard the pawn because if white takes, again, there's queen to a5 hitting the king and the knight at the same time. You win the knight and you win the game. So back to the game, we got this unfortunate situation where I check, and then at this point it's just a matter of developing the pieces. Knight c6, I played queen b6. Of course queen d8 and bishop e6 is fine, but now the rook only has the c8 square. That's why I went to b6. I go here, knight a3. Of course I'm free to trade since I have 3 minor pieces versus 2. We get the move knight d4, and the rest is pretty straightforward. Although the one point that I wanted to make is, say my opponent had played the move castles, bishop g6 and takes here, probably in this position I would have taken away from the center. And the reason is because when you look at this rook, it's on an open file. I can bring my other rook to this open file, and I can put the bishop to hit the pawn. So in this case, having these open files makes a lot of sense. And this is what makes chess so rich, is that there are always exceptions to the rules. Like, I think every video I've done so far, I've said take towards the center, take towards this E or D file. But in this case, capturing away from the center is objectively better because you have an open file for the rook. Now you can go to g4 as well, bishop d6. So all these ideas mean that you should take away from the center. But this is why chess is rich. You have these situations where every time it can be a little bit different, even though there is a general rule. Now the rest of the game is very straightforward. I don't think there's really a whole lot to add. Yeah, there isn't really a whole lot to add. So let's move on to our next game. Here we go, second game. So I'm going to play e4 once again. Of course, I've mentioned e4, d4, c4. All moves are fine. I really do believe as a beginner, though, you should play these straightforward opening approaches. So we got a Sicilian. We're going to go knight f3. Now I'm going to play an open Sicilian here because I do think the open Sicilian as a beginner is one of the better options. I think the 3 things I would suggest are either open Sicilian, the closed Sicilian with knight c3, g3, which is very similar to some Vienna systems, which I'll show you guys afterwards, or to play the Alpine Sicilian with c3 and d4 right away. So this time we're going to go right into it. We're going to play an open Sicilian, and the reason for this is that you bring out the knights pretty much every single time. It's automatic, and now you have very easy development for the 2 bishops on these diagonals. Now the drawback, of course, to playing the open Sicilian is there are many systems, and you can't necessarily create the same setup every time. So like my opponent here plays this move e5, which is objectively a bad move, but I'm not going to play what I'd probably play against a really, really strong top level player. I'm going to play the more logical move at the beginner level, which is knight to f3. Now the reason I'm going to play this is I don't want to trade the knights because this gives black potential to build a big black center. So after takes, black can play for d5. Additionally, the best move that I would play would probably be knight to f5. I don't know if it's the actual best move, but it's what I would play against a strong player. But knight f3 is a little bit easier to play because now I can bring the bishop on the diagonal. I can develop this bishop to e3. I can finish my development on the king side very quickly, and then we start to play in this middle game. Now this is a unique structure that I don't think we've seen in any of our speedrun videos yet, where black has these pawns on d6 and e5 versus e4. Generally, if your opponent has a pawn here, this is what we call a backwards pawn, because this pawn is further out, meaning this pawn can't go back and support the pawn thrust, for example. And I'll show a better example after the game. But when you have a backwards pawn versus pawn, generally what you end up with is if black can play d5 at some point, the general rule is that black should be fine if you can eliminate this weakness. But if black is unable to push this pawn forward, generally white should be a little bit better. So I'm going to castle my king, finish the king side development immediately, and now we get to move a6. Very logical move. Black wants to play for b5. Now I could play a4 to stop b5, but I'm not actually worried about this move, because when I look at the position, I notice that black has all these pieces that are underdeveloped, whereas I've already castled my king. So I'm going to look to try and play something in the center. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to play this move bishop to e3. I have a very specific idea in mind here when I develop this bishop, which is I want to go knight d5 and potentially bishop to b6 to hit this queen, which is why I put the bishop here to begin with. If I were to play knight to d5 right away, black could simply take the pawn. So I'm putting the bishop here. I want to move the knight and the bishop forward. I can't draw my arrows apparently. And now we get to move b5. So here I'm going to play bishop to b3, keeping the bishop on this long diagonal here, spying this pawn very specifically. And I still can play a4 to hit. I can play a4 to hit this pawn structure on the queen side, or my original idea of knight d5 and bishop b6, which is still completely in play. Note that the bishop on b3 really supports this knight maneuver, because if I can take with a queen, I'll hit the knight and the pawn here, and that's why I really want this bishop on the diagonal in the situation. So when your opponent, we have the Sicilian structure with the backwards pawn, it really does revolve around whether white can make use of the square, or if black can get rid of the weakness by pushing the pawn one square forward. Now my opponent is being very slow here. I don't know if my opponent is thinking, or they have a problem with their internet at this point in the game. It's a little bit annoying because I'm ready for the next move. Perhaps my opponent is just thinking here, but this game, it does feel a little bit slow. So let's see what we get. So we get the move pawn to b4. Now this plays right into my hand of what I'm hoping for. So when I go knight to d5, now I'm threatening this bishop b6 move, followed by knight to c7, forking the king and the rook, and my opponent walks right into it. Now there's going to be a knight c7 idea here, and I should just win the game. This is a theme that can become quite common in some of these Sicilians here. Bishop guards the knight, knight forks the king and the rook. Of course, I'm going to take the rook here. It's really beautiful too, because now my opponent's king is in the middle of the board. You have this bond cloud king, but the bishop and the rook can't move here. Let's go rook to e1, attacking the knight. I'm looking to open up this board very quickly due to the lack of development of all these pieces in the center. I don't know if there's an immediate way to punish my opponent here, but it feels like there should be. Actually, what I should have done here is I should have played knight to c7, because if takes, I would have had knight d5, forking the queen and the king. So rook to e1 is probably a little bit inaccurate. We get knight to c5 though, and now... Okay, now I'm just going to take the knight. We get pawn takes. I probably will just take this pawn on e5 here. These two pieces are very sad. They're simply not in the game. Let's take. Now I've got the queen and the rook on these two open files here. This should be a pretty straightforward victory after rook takes knight. If my opponent does not trade the knight, we get bishop to e6. I'm gonna go knight to g6 here, exposing the bishop, exposing the king. This looks very close to a clean checkmate. Let's go check. And is there a checkmate in 2 is the question after king to f7. Now I see rook takes knight. I see rook to e5, king f6. I'm looking for a forced checkmate. I don't actually see a forced checkmate in 2. If I go rook to e4, I guess I'll just go here. There is c4 as well, I guess, to stop the instant mate. But I just take, I go check, and there's a very quick checkmate here on the king side because the king can't really escape. We'll go check, and then we go h4, and that's just going to be checkmate on the spot. There we go. Let's take a look at the analysis. So as I was trying to say at the start of the game, what I would recommend against Sicilian, there are a couple systems. You can play the Grand Prix with pawn to f4. The reason I like this system is it's very straightforward. You develop the knight and then the bishop to either c4 or b5 depending, followed by castle. So for example, say black plays a6 here, you go knight f3, e6, a4, something like d6. You can go bishop c4, d3, and then castle very quickly. It's easy, quick flowing development. You almost always put the bishop on c4, or for example, let's say black plays g6 here, you can go knight f3, bishop g7, and then either bishop c4 or bishop b5, for example, followed by castling. So the theme is very straightforward and it's very, very consistent. So I like the Grand Prix attack. I also think the closed Sicilian very reasonable. It's in the vein of the Vienna. So for example, one of the main lines that I recommend in the Vienna is something like this, and g3 followed by bishop g2, say d5, knight b6. You can go knight e2 in castles. You can also go knight to f3 in castles, followed by d3. Closed Sicilian, exact same structure here. So after we get this move g3, black will play something like g6, same thing. Develop the bishop, develop the knight. Usually you're going to play d3 here to reinforce the chain and open the diagonal and castle here. And this is simply a game, but you have a setup where you always will be able to play this pretty much every single game. You are going to have to learn about pawn breaks and specific attacking ideas on the king side. So it's not super straightforward once you reach the middle game, but you almost always will reach the same sort of setup in the middle game. And that's very good for a beginner because you learn where the pieces sort of belong and what the harmony is between the pieces. Another system that I would recommend is the Alpin with c3 d4, which I think we've already played a few times. And last but not least, what I played in the game, which of course is a standard open Sicilian. Now I like the open Sicilian because you bring the knights out almost by guarantee at the start of the game, and then you have free scope for the two bishops. The downside, of course, there are many different setups. Black can play e5 like in this game. Black can also play something like a Sicilian Najdorf, and generally you don't have a specific sequence you can play. Like against Najdorf, you can go bishop e2, you can go bishop c4, you can go bishop e3, you can go bishop g5, a lot of different moves, but what you do against one system won't always be the same. So for example, say you get this one with knight f6, knight c3, and e5. This system generally is known as the Sveshnikov, and you should probably play knight to b5 here. And after d6, it's not really clear where the pieces belong. Obviously, if you study more, you'll know the theory. But this is one of the very few systems where the knight goes to b5. Generally, the knight doesn't go there. But on the other hand, if you try to play like I did in the game with a slightly different situation with knight to f3, now after bishop b4, the knight and the pawn are very brittle here, and black is actually a little bit better. So the drawback is you have to know exactly what you're doing. In these Sicilians, it's not, you don't get the same setup every single game. So I played d4, we got this e5, now I went to knight f3. Big difference between this and the line I just showed is there's a pawn on d6, so the bishop can't come out. This means that the bishop is a little bit walled in by this pawn. We get h6, bishop c4, castles, a6 here. Note that I believe my opponent played h6 because after knight f6 I can go bishop g5, trade, and now go knight d5 here. And I think my opponent preferred having this knight on f6 where it can't be traded and it targets the e4 while supporting a pawn thrust to d5 down the road, and my bishop can't go here because of the pawn. Like castle, bishop e3, we get b5. So if my opponent plays bishop e7, knight d5 and takes, this idea with bishop b6 would be very strong potentially. There are a lot of lines like this, very specifically in the Najdorf, that I want to point out. So you get some variation within the Najdorf. You get some bishop to e3, like some, let's say e5, knight f3, b5, and white can go something for like a4, b4, knight d5 here. And this idea of bishop b6 is very potent, and or potentially just winning the game on the spot. So these ideas with bishop to e3, knight d5, and bishop b6 do exist quite frequently within the Sicilians, so you should be aware of them. So I play bishop e3, we got bishop e3, b4, knight d5. Now here my opponent probably should have played rook to b8, trying to stop this bishop b6 move. But after c3, let's say pawn, takes, and rook c1 here. Black is a little bit behind in the development here. I'm attacking already on this open c file, and as you can tell from the valuation bar, black is already struggling mightily. So we got knight takes e4. I played this, and I guess already the game's over. Probably I should have played knight to c7 here, because now if black takes, there's knight d5, forking the king and the queen. But it really doesn't matter that much. I go here, takes, knight e5, and the game is over. So all right, let's do one more game. Here we go. We'll start another 10-minute game, and off we go. So we get black pieces. My opponent plays d4, and now I'm going to go knight f6. And I do think generally you're very likely to get bishop f4. I think c4 on move 2 is, you're not going to see it that much until you're probably 1900 online, because almost everybody in the lower ranges will watch educational videos and probably will play something like the Tori, the London, or the Verisov / Jobaba London. So we get knight f3. Now what I'm going to play here is I'm going to play this move e6. Very solid move here. Maybe play b6. We got bishop g5, and this is what's known as the Tori attack. Now I'm going to play the move d5 here, and the reason is that if I don't play d5, my opponent can play e4 very quickly. So say I were to play like, I don't know, b6 and e4 here, there is a pin in play and white would get the big white center. So by going d5, I stop e4, get e3. I'm going to play this move knight bd7 here. We'll probably get bishop d3, very similar to the London, except the bishop's on g5 versus f4. That is a little bit of a strange move. I'm going to go bishop e7, breaking the pin on the diagonal. Not really worried about this pin because I can always go c6 to close the diagonal. So just breaking this pin up immediately. And now I'm also going to finish my development by castling on the next turn. Now, the great thing about this opening is my opponent's played a little bit weirdly. It hasn't been super precise, but nonetheless, my opponent has not made any severe blunders. None of the pieces are hanging, so we're going to reach a middle game at least with play for both sides. We got the trade. Not ideal at a top level just because I get the bishop pair. At the beginner level, completely irrelevant. Even trades bishop for knight, bishop for bishop, knight for knight. Doesn't really matter that much, so I wouldn't worry about concepts like the bishop pair. In fact, for myself, I would say the bishop pair was not even a concept that I really understood until I was master level, so 2200 over the board, which online would be something like 25 or 2600. So something to not be afraid of. Now, we get knight to e5, and what I'm noticing here is that there is temporarily a pin. But if I trade the bishop for the knight here, there are two options I have. I can go queen g5 to attack both the pawns, or I can go c6 here, kicking the bishop. And I think c6 is simple. Pawn guards the pawn. White can't attack on the diagonal here. I'm simply going to take this knight on e5 here. And at this point, I'm simply up one extra pawn. So now let's finish the development. My opponent will castle as well. Let's go back. My opponent's going to castle, I presume. No. G3, very strange move. This move, however, gives me the chance to try and open up the board. Queen b6 is a very reasonable move to attack both the pawns, but I'm going to play e5 here, building this big black center. Let's go knight to f6, attacking the pawn. My opponent's big problem here is g4. Okay, let's go knight e4. I'm going to go in for the kill immediately, try to attack. My opponent is not developing any of these pieces here. You have 1, 2, 3 pieces that are not developed. The king and the rook. White could castle. Oh no, this is going to be a checkmate. This is unfortunate. Now I think that we're going to do one more game. I said that this would be the last game, but we're going to do one more game because this is definitely a game that ended way too quickly. So we get the checkmate. Not a whole lot of meat to this game. As I mentioned at the start of the game, we got bishop g5. I played d5. Bishop e7 also completely fine, but I played d5 primarily because if I play like say b6 and white gets e4 here, there's a big white center, there's the pin. If I take, I lose my queen. I can play h6, but after takes and bishop d3 with the knight and the bishop here guarding these two pawns, white should be doing very well here. So I played d5 to stop e4. We got e3. Now here I would ordinarily expect my opponent to play bishop d3, and then I would go bishop e7. Let's just say knight bd2. I'd play h6, bishop h4, and probably what I would do here is I would play this move knight to h5. And the reason I'd play this move is that if my opponent drops back, I'll trade the knight for the bishop, and we just play a middle game, something like c5 followed by b6, bishop b7, queen c7, and castles, just to illustrate it. Something like this, for example, queen c7, rook e1, and castles to the queen side. This is how you'd finish the development. And if my opponent were to trade after takes, usually you'd get something like castles, something like, I don't know, c4, bring the knight back to f6, and you're looking generally to play something like c5 to contest this white center, or to go b6 and fianchetto the bishop on the diagonal, and then bring the rooks to the center of the board. This position is very it's very dependent on where the pieces are, obviously, in terms of the exact precise evaluation, but that's probably what I would have done if we had gotten bishop d3. Instead, we got bishop b5. I take, we get takes, c6 here. Of course, I can't take the pawn due to the pin, but now pawn attacks the bishop, pawn guards the pawn, bishop's got to go. I take, and now I'm simply up one pawn. And the one other point I want to make here after e5 is if white were to take and then castle, which is what I would normally expect, after the move rook to e8 here, let's just say knight c3, bishop h3, rook e1, and something like queen to b6 here, the pawns on e3 and b2 are both weak. Black's this nice central pawn chain. I don't want to say that you should win this automatically because it's only one pawn, but if you're a strong intermediate player, you're going to win due to the material advantage at this point. We got f5, and then of course the rest is very basic. My opponent forgets the basic development concept of castling, so let's move on to the next game. So here we go. This will be the final game. Let's go again with e4. And now we have to move knight to f6. Now I'm going to play the move e5 here. and I'm gonna go c4. Now this is a system that I played as a child. It's objectively very tricky to play here for black. When I play knight c3, I'm hoping my opponent will trade, because when I take with this pawn, I'm opening up these really nice diagonals for my queen and my bishop here. We got knight c6. I'm going to develop the bishop, guard the pawn, and I'm looking to put this bishop on c4 potentially. We got d6. Now I do believe this is considered a little bit dubious. I don't actually remember why it's considered dubious. Why is this considered dubious? I'm trying to remember. Get d6. I don't actually know. I don't actually remember. So I think what I'll do is I'm just going to play knight f3, developing my knight to guard this pawn. Actually, I realized I hung a pawn by accident. Should have taken first and played knight f3. Wasn't paying attention that black could take. I was so focused on pawn and e5. We get bishop g4. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I think I should get rid of this pawn. Look, yeah, I think I'm going to take with this pawn. My opponent can capture both ways. We got bishop takes f3. I will take with the queen. And now my opponent's actually way behind development, because you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces on the back rank. And I'm already castled. There's an open file here. I'm threatening to bring the bishop to the center, the other rook to the center of the board. And I think my opponent's going to actually lose this game, probably within a couple of moves, if he's not very, very careful here. Because I just have this great development with the 2 bishops on the diagonals, the 2 rooks on the 2 open files in the middle of the board. This is a very, very dire situation. Get queen e7. I'm going to take the pawn here. I'm guarding this with the bishop and the rook. I could take the pawn, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to play bishop b5 here, attacking the knight with the queen and the bishop, and threatening to bring my other rook to the center of the board. Get castles. Okay, I'll take. Whoops. We'll take on c6 here after the trade. I'm only up 1 pawn at the moment, but the big issue here is that my opponent has these 2 pieces that are underdeveloped. And I'm going to try to keep the queens on the board. I'm going to try to attack this king very, very quickly here by lifting my rook. And this rook is going really, really fast. I can also move the bishop to hit the pawn, like bishop here with the queen and the bishop. Let's go here, attacking the queen. I think my opponent missed this, and this game's going to be over very quickly as well. So my opponent resigns the game here. Now, we've not had many Aliekan defenses. In fact, maybe none that I can recall right off. But this system was c4, c5 that I played. This is known as the two pawns Lasker variation, played by the former world champion Emmanuel Lasker. So I played c5. We got to move knight to d5. I go knight to c3 here. We get takes. And the reason that I capture away from the center is I could capture with the b pawn here, but when I take with this d pawn, the idea is to bring the bishop to f4 g5 on this diagonal, bring the queen to g4 here, and also have this free c4 square for the bishop. So the bishops and the queen, the development is very, very straightforward. Now, normally what should be played here is this move e6 for black, opening up the diagonal. And if white trades knights after d4 and d6, you'll notice here that both the diagonals are slowly opening up for the dark square, or the black bishops, I should say, in this situation. So e6 is a little bit better here. Normally the game would go d4, something like d6, takes, and then knight to f3. And the funny thing about this position is that this is actually a transposition to the Alpine Sicilian, which goes e4, c5, c3. And now after the move knight to f6, e5, knight d5, let's say white goes knight f3, you get e6, d4, takes, and d6. And this is the exact same position that I just had on the board here, just to show you guys right here. Or actually, wrong one, right here. This is the exact same position that you get right here. So voila. So you can get that transposition. That's normally what you should play. My opponent made a slightly imprecise decision to trade. I take away from the center. We get knight c6, and now I played the move bishop f4. I do believe knight f3 is supposed to be better, because when black plays d6 here, there's this move bishop to e3 followed by queen to a4 and castles. I think, yeah, takes, it's queen a4 followed by a potential rook to d1 here, or castles if the opportunity presents itself. There's also weak pawn at e5. Bishop goes to b5. So say black plays bishop d7, castles here with bishop b5 and all this pressure on the open file, say queen c8 here. White can actually sack the rook, play bishop b5 followed by rook d1 followed by knight takes e5, and this is a quick strike way to win a game if your opponent isn't aware of this idea. So knight to f3 would have been better, but I went bishop f4. We got d6, and now I played knight f3. We got bishop g4. Oddly enough, white is still better, even if black takes the free pawn for the same reason. You have queen a4 with bishop b5 or castles once again. And white has great pressure here due to the lack of the black development here with all these pieces on their original squares. We got bishop g4. I took. We got this. I castled here. Now black can't take because you lose the queen. Queen e7, takes, bishop b5. What's hilarious here is bishop to a6 is actually stronger according to the computer, with rook to e1, and it's pressure because now if black castles, there's queen takes knight, and you can't take the queen due to the pin. You can't take, because then I would capture king. So bishop a6 slightly better to play for rook to e1, but bishop b5 also more than good enough here. And if black plays a move like queen d7, trying to guard the knight, now there's check, bishop e7, and rook takes d6, and you'll notice the bishop here is pinned, and black can't take back with the queen. You take, you lose the queen, and if you move the queen, the game ends immediately. Just I guess rook takes is best, takes, check, hit everything, king f8, bishop takes, white has an extra bishop, and it's GG. Why not? So we got castles, takes. I keep the queens on the board here. I'm up a pawn. Normally I would say the general rule of thumb, if you're really new to the game, is don't trade down everything if you're only ahead by one pawn. I think if you're ahead by 2 pawns, the even trades are reasonable, but if you're only ahead by 1 pawn, don't automatically trade down. If you're ahead by a knight or a bishop and you have an even trade like queens here, I would recommend it generally. But if it's only 1 pawn, try to think about the position and the placement of the pieces. And here you'll notice that black has 1, 2, these bishop and rook that aren't developed here. There's also a weakness on d6, and when I move the queen away, there are all these rook lifts. Even if I don't go for this rook c4, say black plays, I don't know, let's say rook d5 and like rook e8 here, I can still play rook d1 here with a double stack, massive pressure on this pawn, this great queen that's threatening to attack everything. This is also completely winning. So I played rook d4 here. My opponent probably should have gone king b8, but now after bishop to e3, lining up some very nasty threats, this is also just completely winning. Got bishop f6, rook c4, and now my opponent resigned the game. So I do recommend playing the 2 pawns Lasker variation if your opponent does play the Aliekin defense. I don't think it's an opening you'll see very often, but the idea is very straightforward. You kick the knight, you want to open up these diagonals here. If your opponent plays e6, then you can play d4, and as I mentioned, something like d6, takes knight f3, easy development, move the bishop, castle the king to the king side. This does turn to an Alpin Sicilian, but very easy development to get you into the middle game from the start. So that is going to do it for this edition of our educational speedrun series. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with more recaps, speedrun videos, and everything else in the very near future. Hope you guys enjoyed it and have a great rest of your day. See you soon. Bye.